Today on this episode of Mercedes Garage, Mercedes inline four-cylinder gasoline engines on Mercedes Garage. Hi and welcome back to another episode of Mercedes Garage. Today we're going to be talking about the Mercedes-Benz inline four-cylinder gasoline, or in foreign countries as they call petrol engine. And there's no difference between gasoline is gasoline and petrol is petrol. Just in America we call gasoline petrol gasoline and the rest of the world calls it petrol. So we'll first start out with what is an internal combustion gasoline or petrol engine. Is basically it works similar to a diesel engine, except you have spark plugs igniting the fuel, and the compression of a gasoline engine is less than a diesel engine. So thus we'll try to show a picture in right now showing that the pistons are up, the spark plug ignites the fuel, piston goes down, that's your power, and so on and so forth. So that is basically, without getting into more details of it, that's basically how a gasoline engine works versus a diesel. As stated in the other video about the inline six-cylinder diesel engine, we'll touch on this briefly. Mercedes in the early 1900s through about the 20s had variable horsepower on their engines, which there's information out there on these cars. They were gone by Mercedes Simplexes, was one of the Mercedes Simplex, not Simplexes, was one of them. There were basically, for example, would be Mercedes whatever model, 25, 35, 55 horsepower engine. This was done to prevent the German German horsepower tax that was in effect at that time, to only pay the tax on, let's say, a 10 horsepower engine versus one that was a 40 horsepower engine. And this was done by having a switch or a lever, because it wasn't a button, that controlled a supercharger in the engine to vary the horsepower of the engine. We'll discuss that later on, because pretty much we'll start this video off as part one of gasoline or petrol engines of Mercedes-Benz. These are the inline four-cylinder, part one. There should be one more part for four, and then we'll go on to the V6s, or inline sixes, probably inline six, and then the V6 and then V8, V12s too. So we'll start off with the inline four cylinder. Let me get this up here. And again, there's no real other information to this other than what I could find on Wikipedia. For whatever reason, Mercedes really doesn't have, there's no websites or book to any degree that shows which engines were in which models at the time. Like, for example, for my engine. 616 diesel engine was in the 123 or whatever, the Gruttenwagen from these years to this year. It was, there's no book that I know of. If you do know of a book, put it in the comments, both diesel and gasoline. Okay, so we'll start out this video with the, excuse me while I bend down here to see this, inline 4, as I said. The first one is the M23 engine. This was a prototype engine. Well, the cars were prototypes that it was in. It was from 1933 to 1936. And that was in the it was a 4-cylinder. It was in the 130 model, or W23. The W30, which was a prototype sports car, which never was made. The 130, as shown here, was a rear engine car, which was very similar to Porsche, that also at that time worked for, little before that time, worked for Mercedes. The 170, or later became the W128, the 170H was called a Heck motor because that means rear in German. And as you can see with the picture, the 170H from 1936 looks very much like the Beetle, and here's a picture of Ferdinand Porsche, who developed that kind of engine. He worked for Mercedes between 1923 and 1928, so they had some of his designs laying around. The next engine is the M30 engine. It's a 1.5 liter. That one, there's not much on the M30 engine. It was from 1934 to 1939. And the next one is the M136 engine. That was used in, which models used that one? That was in the, as you can see in the picture here, that was in the V170 and the 170S, which was basically Mercedes's, at that time, base model. It was similar to a 123, a 115 of that era. This was the workhorse car for Mercedes. But they used it for everything from police cars to taxi cabs to everyday people bought them for use. So that's with the 170, and it was in the 170S, which was just a luxury version of the V170. And that car was, we're not talking about the cars in this series, we're talking about the engines mostly. The next engine is the M121, and that was used in the 190 SL and the 190 Pagoda. No, not Pagoda, I'm sorry, correction, Pontoon. The 190 Pontoon and the 190 SL Roadster, which was an interesting story about the 190 Roadster convertible. That was made after the Gullwing as an affordable alternative to the Gullwing from Max Hoffman's requesting Mercedes to make the 190 SL. So this was the engine that was in there, the M121, and here's a bigger enlarged picture of that and how it, the simplicity of the engine and the layout. You have your coil pack and you have your radiator and your air intake and your air filter, your battery, of course. and that was what was used in the 190 SLs and the 190 pontoons. Now we'll wait for this to, excuse me while this goes to the, there's a little lag here because I have to film this in 2 segments. And there's different variants. The M121BL, the M121BLL, or BII, I don't know if that's an I or an L. And then we have the M121BIX or the BLX. I think that's an I. So there's different variants of the same engine, just like how Mercedes has done in recent years. So they were doing that same thing at that time. When this goes back, I'll tell you when this engine went. Oh, and this was also fitted with the Sorex carburetor, which was used on Mercedes of that era. The 50s era Mercedes used either the Zenith carburetor or the Solex carburetor. This engine was also on the, I think it's a 111, the W111, which was the, try to go back here. I'm sorry, the W110 tail fin. The only Mercedes which actually had a tail fin, which was a little late to the tail fin madness, but it came a little later. And that's the M121 engine, and that was from 1955 to 1968. So they got quite a few years out of that one. The next engine was the, excuse me while I try to see this, M118 engine, and that was, remember this is between 1.5 liters and 1.8 liters. This engine ran from 1965 to 1972 in production. So we'll see what vehicles this was in. This is an interesting engine, the 118. The M118 engine from Mercedes was never in a Mercedes. This engine was designed by Daimler AG, i.e. Mercedes-Benz, when Mercedes was in negotiations to buy Audi, which it was put into an Audi, not into a Mercedes. So we're not going to really talk much about this because this is about an Audi, and I know nothing about Audis, except for the Quattro and the Audi 5000, but I don't know that much about Audis. It was in the Audi 103. So this was again an engine that was made by Mercedes with the intent of them buying Audi, which they didn't buy Audi. So I don't know that story, so we won't get into that. The next engine is the M115 engine, and this did see a lot of use. This was in several different models, several different variants, as you could see on the screen on your left-hand side or right-hand side. The M115 920, the M115 921, M115 923. It was used in this T2 truck, or sort of panel truck of some kind. It was in the 115 and 114, W114 and W115 gasoline models. Is a 200. It was in a 220 in the same body style. The 115 926 was another one. Also, the horsepower is, what was the horsepower? The horsepower is about 95 horsepower, which isn't a lot, but it's not bad for that car. It was in a 120, early 123s, or most 120, up until 1980. Was in the 200 123, which was never sold in the US. The only gasoline model that we got in a 123 was the 280E in the US. The 230E was never sold here in a 123, as far as I know. Maybe at one time it was briefly. I will have to check that. And it was in both a coupe and a wagon version of the 122 230. Like I said, that one was, I don't think the 230 was sold here. It was in the G class, which that picture is incorrect because a 230 GE is a G class. Okay, so now moving down, we have now, engine is probably one of the most important four-cylinder engines that Mercedes ever made. And it's probably one of the most legendary four-cylinder engines that Mercedes ever made. The legendary M102 engine, which was used many times, well, not many times, but used in a car that was very special. The 190 2.6 liter 190 Evolution, which was a special, we'll talk about that later on, but we'll start with the first one. It was just in a 190. It was a 2.5. Here's a picture of it, and it's 2.5 liters instead of the 1.9 liters that most 190 engines are. So that's, like I said in one of the previous videos, be prepared to be a little bit confused by Mercedes. Doesn't really always go by the number on the car being the liter of the engine. So if you have like I just said, the 190 should be a 1.9 liter gasoline engine. Well, there's also a 2.5 liter 190, 16 valve. So like I said, there's other ones that have that same contradiction of that number, which it's not really a contradiction, it just could be a little confusing. So that was in the 190. And also in Australia, you didn't get the 190, you got the 180E. So they downed the liter by a tenth of a liter. I guess that would be a tenth. Yeah, a tenth. From a 190 to a 1.8 liter. So now it's in the 190E and the 190 1.5. Yeah, well, 190E. It was in some 123s. The 123 200 and the 123T, which is a wagon or estate. W201, which I forgot. The W201 is a 190. Was in the 124 200. Was in the 190 variants of this engine. M102 924, M102 938. There's many variants of this. It was in the again in a 190E, not from 1983 to 1985. It was also used in the Apthia which I've never heard of that car. It's a beautiful car, which wasn't made by Mercedes. W201, another 190. Now it's a 2.0 liter, so it should have been a 200, but they called it a 190. It was in a 124 again, 200E. They changed the eject. It was in a G class, G200 GE from 1986 to 1989. It was in a couple 120, 280, 230E, 230CE, and a 230TE 123. It was in a few more 124. Sorry if I'm bending down. I'm trying to look at my computer screen at this, and it's a little small. It was in another non-Mercedes. It was in and again, it was in the 190 M102.990 engine that was in a 190 2.5 liter 16 valves, and now it's in the, by 1988, is it 88? No, 1989, it was in the Evolution 190 2.5 16 valve Evolution, which is now a very rare and highly sought after car because they didn't make very many of them. Has how many horsepower? 197 horsepower out of a 4-cylinder engine is pretty good, especially for late 80s standards. So that was then replaced by the Evolution 2, which came out in 1990, and that was basically the end of the 190 series. The next engine is the M111, and this was in, again, a bunch of models. C classes from that era, early 90s. This came out in, let's see if it's 1992 to 2003, so about 11 years they went with this engine. So it had a good run. It was in the W202 C class 180, C180, which was never sold in the US. But that engine was here in the US, but not as a 180. C180 was not here. Another C class, M111 942. That was in an E200, W210, and a W2. I can't see it because the picture's hiding it. Bear with me. W202. C200. Which I'm not sure. And now we have something. Now Mercedes, by the late mid-90s, made that same engine, the W111, into a compressor, which just means turbo, supercharged in German. That's all it means, is they've added a supercharger. As you can see on the screen, is the R170, and that came both in a compressor, and non-compressor, which just means turbocharged. The M111 946, which is an SLK again, R170, E200 compressor. I keep calling it progression. It's compressor. The C class W203, a van, V200 van, W203, the newer C-Class, the second generation C-Class. And another compressor. These are all compressors, except for the E-Class, which just popped up real quick. It was my fault. Another compressor. There, like I said, there's quite a few variants of this engine. Two more, an E-Class and a C-Class from the 90s. And it looks like a 211, I think. I don't know what that is. An MB100 light commercial van. Maybe, and that's Senyang, Korean manufacturer, put them in their cars as well. Another SKL 230 compressor, E200 compressor, which is an E-Class. I think that's a 210. And another compressor. So as you can see, this engine has many different variants and was either with a compressor or slash supercharger or without. So either way, it's basically the same engine. It was in a van. It's in a van by Volkswagen, actually got it, and that Senyang put it into a pickup truck too. Okay, so that takes care of that engine. Now the next, oh, by the way, let's go back for a second. The M111 engine was from 1992 to 2006. So that had a pretty good run there. So the next one is the M166 engine. And this engine and cars that it was in were never sold in the US. This was the A-Class, which is the compact A-Class, not the current CLA, which is now sold in the US. And this was a transverse engine, meaning normally an engine goes this way in a car. So if you're looking at the hood popped open like this, the engine you're facing goes towards the back of the car, either in a V-shaped, half and half on each side, or an inline with the pistons going from front to back. A transverse engine, I'll show you with this tray. This is a normally engine, how they're normally sitting in a car, V or inline. I don't know if that came out. V or inline. Okay. Transverse just means it's going this way. Right to left, or left to right. And that's done basically because it's a front-wheel drive car. It's very common in General Motors cars and in other front-wheel drive vehicles because part of the transmission is then there on the right or left side. It depends on which way they've transversed it. And right or left front wheel is your drive wheel. So that's what's and that's it, as the picture is showing, that is not the correct A-Class that engine was in. That's the current A-Class, which is sold in the US under the CLA badging. So this should show, I should show you a picture which will be coming up of which that engine was in, the W168 from bear with me, is this one right here. And that car was never sold in the US at all. So we'll just, maybe somebody could comment. This one that's showing here now, the W177 is sold in the US. No, that's a hatch. The hatchback is not sold here. The sedan is sold here. It gets very confusing. Now we'll just pause for 1 second. Unlike Ford and General Motors, for the most part, there may be another manufacturer. You have an option. Say it's a Chevy Silverado pickup truck. You want the V8, the V6, or the 4-cylinder if they make such. But for example, this is just for example. You could choose any engine. It's still that model. Mercedes doesn't do it that way. You have to buy another model, like a 240D versus a 300D, or an S430 versus an S500. You can't get the S500 engine in the S430. You have to just buy the whole car. So that's one. That's why there's so many different models with basically a similar engine. So that's one reason. This next engine is not made by Mercedes, so we'll cut that one out. We're just talking about ones that are made by Mercedes for Mercedes. The next one is an M271, and now here's a picture of that engine, and that was in another lot of cars again. CLK to W209, W203, C-Class, compressor. These are all compressors. Compressor with a K, as you could, K-O-N, compressor, not C. It was in an E-Class, W211, W211 again, an R171, which is a newer SLK. It was in that one. Let's see which other ones. I'll try to get this. And there's also many different variants. It was in a C-Class Sports Coupe. It was in a 203, a W208 CLK. So as you can see, this engine was the M271 was used quite a bit in very many different forms. And now we have something new called charged gasoline injection, which is basically, I think is that the hybrid? Bear with me, please. No, just there is one of these that are a hybrid. So, excuse me, I got an itch. Edit. Bear with me. This is taking a little. This has to catch up to me. So the next one is the M266, and there's nothing on this one. It's an inline 4, and it's used in the B200 series, and the B-Class as of now is not sold in the US. So Comment below if you have one of these. M270 and M274 engine. So you can see here's the picture of the engine. It's a transverse engine. As you can tell, it's going this way versus this way. It's used in the front wheel drive cars, which nobody would believe that Mercedes is making a front wheel drive car, but they are. And that's still in production from 2011 to now. So this engine is still currently in production and still in vehicles. It's in the current A class, the B class, another B class, another A class. It's in different variants. It's in a VGLA, GOA. It's in a W176, a X156, which is this GOA. It's the same car. Why sometimes it's the same car? It's just by reboring the cylinders, they made the engine larger, more liters, and changed a computer or two, and you now have more horsepower. So it's the same engine, but just a slightly different variant of it, or tuning of it, and you have a new model. It's in a couple Infinities, and that's basically the end of that. There's no, oh wait, there's more. Now this one has a lot. The 274 is a very engine that is very used very much. It's in the W205, W212, the GLK, X204, R172, as I said before, W213, it's in a GLC, not to be confused with the GLK, which is the same car but changed names. It's in a Nissan. It's in an E350E, W213, W213. It's in a V class, which is not, that particular one was not in Europe. That's for China, Chinese market. There's a W213, and then this one is the M274 engine is also in a C350E, which is a hybrid engine, as you can see on the picture. As I said before, they did make a hybrid version of that engine too. So as you can see, that engine was used quite a bit and it's still in production. Here's the M200 engine, which that is in Renault, with a partnership between Mercedes and Renault, and it's somehow made into a diesel, which that I'm not sure about, so because that doesn't make any sense. So that basically concludes part one of Mercedes inline four-cylinder gasoline or petrol engines. So thank you for watching. Thank you for sitting through this video of this. Sorry it was a little long. So if you liked the video, hit the thumbs up button. Please comment below. And thank you for the 34 subscribers. Thank you very much for subscribing to the Mercedes Garage, or Mercedes Garage, not the Mercedes Garage, Mercedes Garage. Thank you very much for subscribing, And please continue to subscribe. If you're watching these videos, please subscribe. It helps out the channel to keep it going. So take care. Thank you, and enjoy keep on motoring in your Mercedes-Benz.